Right, for a couple of years now, the SNP's leader at Westminster, Stephen Flynn, has been seen as a man on the rise in his party, a future leader, many seem to reckon. He's certainly a scrapper, and he put a whole load of noses out of joint this week with the news that he wanted a second job, a seat at Holyrood. The SNP's own party rules explicitly forbid members from standing in both parliaments at the moment, so what's he up to? Does he just want to be closer to the centre of power in Scotland, or is he on manoeuvres? Let's ask him, shall we? Stephen Flynn from Aberdeen, good morning.
Good morning, Martin.
Right. I detect a fairly calamitous delay in our communications, 3 or 4 seconds. We'll just have to make do with that. Listen, what are you doing here? The rules prevent you from doing this. You're ignoring the rules and saying you're going to do it anyway. Why?
Well, Martin, from my perspective, probably best at what I do is set out the fact that rules as they stand at the moment don't preclude me from standing in a Holyrood election. That would be a decision for the National Executive Committee to make. All rules that were previously in place are election specific. What I'm seeking to do here is put myself forward to members in the Aberdeen South and North Kincardine constituency, where I live with my family here in Aberdeen, and ask them whether they want me to represent them in Edinburgh for 2 years, whilst I also represent them in Westminster. I believe I would do that without taking a single penny of a second salary. I believe that in doing so I would save the public purse a significant amount of money by not causing a by-election, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds. And of course, in doing so, I would save all the political parties the necessity to spend up to £100,000 on a by-election campaign. My motivations are simple. I want to be ambitious for Aberdeen. I want to be ambitious for Scotland. The big discussions that are happening right now that impact the lives of the people who I represent are happening in Westminster. They're happening in Holyrood. I want a wee bit of that action. I want to be able to contribute to make our society the best place it possibly can be. And hopefully members in the constituency will be given the opportunity to vote for me.
Well, members of the SNP group at Holyrood certainly don't seem impressed with the way you've handled this. They're said to be united in anger against you at the moment. Did you anticipate this reaction, or have you messed up?
Look, there's always going to be a strong reaction to someone seeking to do things slightly differently. I've experienced this before in politics. It's not something which is particularly pleasant. It's not something which is particularly comfortable, particularly when you're dealing with people who you know really well. You're dealing with, in my case, a colleague who overlaps almost entirely with the constituency that I currently represent at Westminster. This is not a pleasant situation for either of us. All I'm seeking to do is ask the members who vote for us, who ultimately decide who their candidate is going to be, to make a decision. Do they want Audrey to be their candidate, or do they want me to be their candidate, or indeed do they want someone else? Because there may well be other people seeking candidacy for this seat for the SNP. And you know, I hope that campaign, if I'm allowed to take part in it, that is, can be done in good faith and in good spirit, that we can have a positive battle of ideas, because that's something which I think the people expect of their elected representatives.
When you refer to Audrey, you're talking about Audrey Nicoll, who of course is the sitting MSP for Aberdeen South and Kincardine North, the constituency you want. The Sunday Mail this morning is suggesting you called her the night before you made this announcement and suggested to her that she might stand aside. Did you?
That's a lie, Martin.
Right. So they're completely wrong. You didn't make that call. When did you speak to her? When did you tell her that you were going to do this?
So I did call Audrey the night before. We had a fairly cordial conversation, albeit brief. Myself and Audrey speak relatively frequently, as I'm sure you can imagine. I made clear to her my intentions. Audrey, of course, suggested that some had been thinking that I may seek to seek candidacy in Dundee, which I assume would be a much bigger story. I don't want to do that. I live in Aberdeen. This is where my life is. I'm very fortunate to represent the people here. She told me that she wasn't overly surprised at the decision that I was taking, that I was obviously seeking to progress my activities in politics, and that was ultimately the end of the conversation. I had hoped it had happened sooner. There's obviously been significant goings on in Aberdeen locally with regards to politics, and I thought it was best to leave Audrey to deal with some of that. I, of course, was dealing with other things in my own personal life which prevented me from having an earlier conversation, which I'm sure people in the political world are aware of. So it was a conversation that was had the night before, Martin, but I think that was the right thing to do.
So you went to her the night before. You basically called her up the night before and said, right, tomorrow you're going to read in the P&J that I'm coming for you. Was she angry?
No.
She wasn't? How did she respond? Sanguine?
No. Well, as I say, we had a conversation. She told me she wasn't surprised at the fact that I was putting myself forward for election, which has meant it's been quite a surprise to me, Martin, to see some of the commentary which has been in the public debate. Look, none of this is particularly edifying for anyone. I don't want to be doing this. I don't want to be having these discussions on television, trying to defend myself over lies and fabrications that are in newspapers this morning. But that's the reality of politics sometimes. It's not pleasant. And, you know, I'm not going to shy away. I'm not going to be hounded out from standing for what I believe in, which is to represent the people of Aberdeen South and North
Do you think
Kincardine,
they'd be better served by you than by her?
By them both in Westminster and in Holyrood for a short period. I think that's a decision for local members to take.
But what do you think? And you obviously think Holyrood needs you.
Of course I do. Of course I believe that I can make a contribution, Matt, and I believe that I have the abilities to put forward the best argument possible for the people that I represent. I think I've shown in Westminster that that's doable, and I think I can take those lessons and the learnings that I've had from Westminster to Holyrood. And this is in stark contrast to what most politicians in Scotland seek to do, which is to go from Holyrood down to Westminster. I want to go in the opposite direction. Of course there's going to be a short overlap. I don't want a single penny.
It could be 3 years, right? If the next general election, if the next Westminster election is 2029, it's 3 years of an overlap. Did you tell the First Minister, did you tell John Swinney this was your plan?
Well, Martin, if we were to look at and it's a very Blairite government, if we were to look at the terms of Tony Blair's government, they were on a 4-year cycle, and it wouldn't surprise me if Keir Starmer was to determine that 4-year cycles were the way forward. So we could be talking about halfway through.
Did you tell John Swinney you were going to do this?
I had conversation. I had conversations with people right across the party, locally, local activists, key local activists, everyone who needed to be aware of what my intentions were aware of what my intentions are. And I certainly hope that ultimately the members who put me in place as an SNP candidate for the Westminster election, who had the faith to do that in me then, also get the opportunity to do that for the Holyrood.
Just to be clear, did you tell the First Minister you were going to do this?
Too much of the party, and hopefully they'll... The First Minister was, of course, aware. He's a party leader. He's aware of what my intentions are.
When did you tell him?
So many other people right across the party were aware of what my intentions were, Martin. Martin, I'm not going to delve into too many private conversations, if you forgive me. I believe I might have opened a floodgate in that regard by being very, very clear in terms of some of your questions earlier. But the people who needed to know what my intentions were aware of what my intentions were, because I want to act in the best interests of the party throughout this. And ultimately, Martin, let me be very clear. If the leadership of the party, through the National Executive Committee, determine that they don't want me on the pitch at the Holyrood elections, I will continue to do my job of campaigning heart and soul for the Scottish National Party, from the bench or from the stands, because I believe that we need to win the Holyrood elections for the best interest of the SNP and the best interest of the people of Scotland.
Here's the problem. You've pilloried Douglas Ross repeatedly for doing this very thing, for double jobbing. You made a joke of it at your speech to party conference this year. Why is it all right for you to do it and not him?
Well, of course, there's a significant difference between myself and Douglas Ross. He, of course, wanted to go from Holyrood to Westminster. I want to go from Westminster to Holyrood.
Still 2 jobs.
As I understand it, Douglas Ross took 2 salaries. I certainly won't be taking 2 salaries. Douglas Ross didn't just have two jobs. He had 3 jobs, and at one point, I think he might even have had a 4th. So there's a big difference here. And of course,
well, one was party leader, one was running the line at football matches. He didn't take 2 salaries, by the way. He did what you say you're going to do. He did exactly what you say you're going to do.
Well, fair play. I wasn't aware of that, and fair play to Douglas Ross for doing so. But look, if we're going to look at precedents here, the former First Minister of Scotland, an SNP former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond, from 2007 to 2010, had the wherewithal to be able to be present in Holyrood, despite being First Minister, and in Westminster. You can read his speeches on the UK Parliament website from throughout that time. It's been done before. And ultimately, Martin,
but then your party decided they were going to change the rules to make sure they couldn't do that.
Surely they should be afforded.
All right. Joanna Cherry was prevented from standing against Angus Robertson for a seat at Holyrood. She says this is not an issue of principle or policy, it's an issue of personality. Have you been given an assurance that you will be allowed to do this? What makes you so sure that you will be allowed to do this? And as a supplementary to that, Mr. Flynn, this could all be just got rid of. This whole scandal could be got rid of if you just chucked in your Westminster seat, called a by-election on the same day as the Holyrood election and took your chances.
So there's a lot to unpack there, Mark, and I'll start from the end. When it comes to the date of a by-election, of course, that's not set by the SNP, that would be set by the local authority. In the most recent example, Neil Gray's decision to stand down in order to run for Holyrood last time around, the by-election did not take place on the same day. I'm looking to save the public a significant amount of money, the public in Aberdeen, by not having a by-election. I think that would be welcomed by them in these tough financial times. I'm looking to save the party a significant amount of money as well. In relation to the decision that the NEC took previously, I can only speculate as to the reasons why that took place. I think some are perhaps speculating with a more accurate degree of detail than others in that regard. But that's for those people on the NEC to outline why they did that. The party's position for decades beforehand was to allow people to represent their constituents in Edinburgh and in Westminster. I believe I can do that with the best of my abilities.
Are you on manoeuvres at the moment? You've made no secret in the past that you fancy a crack at the leadership. Is this the start of it?
So I'm ambitious, Martin. I'm seriously ambitious for Aberdeen and for Scotland.
And for Stephen
I don't
Flynn.
believe that there's going to be a leadership contest in the Scottish National Party. I don't think that's called for. I don't believe that there's going to be a leadership contest in the Scottish National Party for a long, long time, because John Swinney is going to win the Scottish Parliament elections in 2026. He's going to continue as First Minister, and should there be a future leadership election, it will be in the dim and distant future, because John Swinney is leader of our party and he's going to be the leader of our party for a long time to come.
OK, I'm not going to draw you out any more on that. You mentioned your party finances a second ago. I want to ask you about that in a second, but you also mentioned Neil Gray. Goodness, you won't be upset if I tell you were second choice this morning. We'd love to have Neil Gray in to speak to us about, I mean, he kind of out-scandaled you later in the week with this ministerial cars to football story. If viewers and listeners aren't aware of it, he is the Sports Minister as well as the Cabinet Secretary for Health. He took a ministerial car to a football match on several occasions, primarily to follow his favourite team, Aberdeen. Friends and family perhaps going along for the ride. Was this an error of judgment on his part? Is this a scandal?
I think the scandal here is the fact that Neil Gray chose to go to far too many Aberdeen games, if I may, Martin. Look, I think when it comes to how ministers partake in their duties, I think we need to be serious about the fact that a sports minister going to sporting events is not a scandal. He is doing his job, and he's doing his job to the best of his abilities, because what tends to happen in politics is you tend to create relationships, have discussions with people, and that can only happen by being in those places at certain times. I would certainly be encouraging all of our ministers to get out with the people that they represent, the bodies who, of course, play a huge role within Scottish society. And football is, of course, our national game. Neil is a huge sports fan, and I think it's right that he, as sports minister, goes to sporting matches. I'm struggling to see what the scandal is here.
OK, well, as he said himself, he might have gone to see other teams other than the one he supports. Look, before you go, you mentioned your party finances. We learned yesterday that your party headquarters is laying off 40% of its staff just ahead of Christmas. Well-run organisations don't do that kind of thing, do they? What's going on?
It's a tough but necessary decision, as I understand it, to make sure that the party is in the best condition possible going into the 2026 elections. Obviously, earlier this year, I had to go through a very similar process with SNP staff down in London. It's an incredibly tough and challenging experience to go through. My thoughts are very much with all of the HQ staff, who I know very well, who'll be having a very troubled weekend. And I think when we're having the wider discussion in relation to this, we need to be mindful of the fact that there is people behind these numbers, as people with friends and families and responsibilities, and hopefully this can all be done in a way which is hopefully as swift as possible to ensure that we get in a position that the party is able to fight the election, but hopefully meet the needs of those people as they leave the organisation too. OK,
very briefly, if the party had been better run in the past, might this not have happened?
I think the key to any party having a big staff staffing group is making sure that you're in a position to attract investment. That's the same for all our organisations. I would like to think that I can maybe play a role in the future in helping to make sure that the party is able to attract further investment into the organisation, and I'm sure that applies to all elected members right across the SNP.
OK, a man with all sorts of ambitions for his roles for the future. Stephen Flynn in Aberdeen, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Sunday show this morning.